It was Christmas Eve, 2730, when I met the Winterman. The night was cold, and my mother was working the late night shift at the emergency room in Swamp City. She called me before bedtime, and she told me she had to stay late because the nurse that was supposed to relieve her was presently in the emergency room having a cleaver removed from her rib cage. It did not help that the sun was already set, so it would be very unsafe for her to come home until the sun had risen. The snow made it hard to drive, visibility was minimal even with the full moon, and that was before you had to deal with all of the wolves that stalked Swamp City at night. Murders are a daily occurrence, and the police didn't even bother investigating the murders that happened on the streets at night. It was just an assumed risk of traveling alone at night in the city. So she would have to leave during the morning, and as for my father, I didn't really know who he was, and my mother didn't know where he was. So I was alone on Christmas Eve. I had been alone at home before, but I still missed my mother. So I finished up the cookie and meat pies we were going to make for the Winterman, and I left them on a plate, along with a glass of sherry and some carrots for the reindeer. Most of my classmates celebrate Saturnalia or Hanukkah earlier in the month, and others celebrate Kwanzaa a little later in the month, but only a few of us specifically celebrated Christmas, and to the best of my knowledge, I was the only one who celebrated it on the 25th. Most who celebrated Christmas did so for 13 nights. So my family's traditions were very different than most. We made dessert and dinner, intending to be shared with the Winterman. My mother and I would bake cookies and shepherd pies to eat together, with a couple left on the plate for the Winterman. I would drink milk and she would drink sherry. The Winterman would be dressed in red and he would enter our house to leave gifts for good children, and for bad children, he would take them away from their parents. Every year, I stayed up late trying to catch the Winterman, but I always missed him as I fell asleep. But this year, I thought I was ready. Every year, I got presents from the Winterman, so I knew that I was a good kid. So as midnight approached, I sipped on my milk and nibbled on the oatmeal raisin cookies as I waited for the Winterman to enter our house. In old traditions, the Winterman would either get in either through the chimney or the front door. Our house was a single story with two bedrooms. It had no chimney, and all of the doors and windows were locked at all times. Still, my mother reassured me that the Winterman would get into our house through powerful magic that allowed him to visit every household on the planet in a single night. I listened carefully to the radio with the Winter Watch, constant radio updates on the location of the Winterman provided by the Imperial military. He started in Aetoria and made his way west through the Middle Kingdom, Basua, Mayquil, and Europa, a process that took him nearly all day as he traveled where night set and made his way west. Then he took a break, visiting Sealy, the Northern Forest, and then finally the Seven Cities, stopping first in Eden City, Imperial City, Isle City, River City, Cathedral City, and finally, Swamp City. The disc jockey barely mentioned Swamp City when the power went out. The house was silent and dark. Not even a squeak could be heard. The moonlight barely trickled in through the closed blinds as I stayed still, barely breathing. The loss of power was frightening, but when I realized it was just a power outage, I took a deep breath and I let my heart slow down when I realized I heard something outside. I thought it was a car when I heard the sound of crunching snow outside and I could see lights flash outside. So I approached the window and I peered outside to see if it was my mother somehow, or if it was a car I recognized, or worse, a car I didn't recognize. What I saw outside was not a car nor a truck. It was a vehicle of a very different kind. It was a massive sleigh made of gold and red wood. There were 8 reindeer in 2 rows of 4, but they weren't like the kind we had seen in the city zoo. They were massive, over 3 meters tall with snow-white fur, blood-red eyes, and large red pointed antlers with light fuzz on them. Their harnesses were also made of red wood, and unlike the ropes of cartoons and storybooks, they were connected to the sleigh by large, heavy chains of rust and iron. The front of the sleigh had 2 different lanterns on the front of it, lighting both the sleigh and the land just in front of the sleigh. The seats themselves were red and soft-looking with a large back seat that had 2 separate burlap sacks. But what interested me the most was the sleigh driver. Winterman was an old man, like I expected, and he was heavy-set with a large white beard. His coat and hat were red-lined with white fur, with big black leather boots, and I could see he wore black leather beneath the red jacket. He carried a large white cane with 2 golden jewels on top of the cane, which resembled eyes in a skull. And around his neck was a leather necklace with a bird's skull. The Winterman grabbed an empty burlap sack as he headed to the door. I watched eagerly as the Winterman approached the door. He wasn't exactly the way I thought he would have looked, but sometimes children's stories drew things differently. Horses, dogs, and birds don't look the exact same way they do in the stories, but you could still recognize it, and I could still recognize the Winterman as he approached the door and he knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I approached the door about to open it when I stopped. Mom always told me to never open the door for anyone except her, that letting strangers into the house would not be allowed without her permission. Except this is the Winterman. Surely she would give permission to let him in if I could call her, wouldn't she? Knock, knock, knock. My hands were resting on the doorknob, about to flip over the lock when, while I was overthinking about what to do or not to do, my mom made me promise not to let anyone else in. She was clear about it, even for her friends. She didn't want me letting them in without her in the house, and she wouldn't have me let in my own friends without her there. So even with the Winterman outside, she wouldn't want me to let him in. Knock, knock, knock. I removed my hand from the knob, the lock still in place. I might make the Winterman upset, but I wasn't going to be letting him in without Mom there. If the Winterman couldn't get inside of the house without letting him in, he could leave his presents outside and we could get to them tomorrow morning. I stepped back and there was silence behind the door. Step, step, step. I was far away from the door when I felt a gloved leather hand drop on my right shoulder as the Winterman spoke. Oh, oh, oh. What a loyal child listening to their mother. Such a nice child. So I will be sure to get you a very special gift, the Winterman said as I pulled away and I could see him up close. His face was heavily wrinkled, but I could tell that he was smiling underneath his beard. He opened his seemingly empty burlap sack as he reached in, and he pulled out a very large box that he laid underneath the tree, one with no name on it. And he also pulled out a single wrapped envelope that had a torch stamp on it, as it was addressed to just the name Mom that he put on the branches of the tree. Is that box for me? I asked the Winterman, who nodded. Ho, ho, ho. It is. All I need is your name, and I will write it on the box. But that isn't your big gift, he said warmly, and I eagerly gave him my name. As he pulled out a scroll from his coat, and he removed his glove, and he wrote on the list with his index finger, like there was ink on his fingertip, although I don't know why it was red. Then my name appeared in a golden cursive script on the box. I smiled as I asked the Winterman, "What is my big gift?" I asked the Winterman as he pointed towards the front door, which was now open, and I could see the sleigh outside. Despite the door being open, the living room wasn't cold at all, and the Winterman spoke. "You get to visit my workshop, beyond the Northern Vortex," he said, and I was excited, but then I realized I would need to be back for Christmas. "Will I be back in time for Christmas?" I asked the Winterman, who laughed and nodded. "Ho, ho, ho! I promise. I'll bring you back in time for Christmas," he said as he held my hand and led me to his sleigh. I thought about refusing for a moment, but I knew I had to trust the Winterman. All the stories told me about his workshop beyond the Northern Vortex, a place full of wondrous elves, fae, ponte, and mystical beings that would make the fae of Hypenaria and the yokai of Nippon look mundane in comparison. There was even a story, one of my favorites, about riding in the sleigh with the Winterman, and you could spend years in the workshop and return at the same night. And since the Winterman was real, clearly he was the same legendary figure in the stories, even if he didn't look exactly like his pictures. I eagerly followed the Winterman, holding his gloved hand as we walked outside the door, both shutting and locking it behind us. Despite the snow, it did not feel cold to me at all, and as we walked to the sleigh, I only noticed one pair of footprints behind us as we made our way to the sleigh, which also had no tracks behind it. He picked me up and placed me in the sleigh, carefully buckling me in as he took his seat, and I looked out over the footprints. Only his own footprints visible in the snow. "Onward!" he yelled to his reindeer as they charged forward through the snow. The wind and snow pushed past me, but I couldn't feel the wind on my skin. I could see it push my pajamas and push back my hair, but I couldn't feel the cold. I assumed it was part of the magic as I watched the sleigh pull us through the streets of Swamp City. Even at midnight, there were parked cars on the streets. I could hear the crunch of both snow and broken glass beneath the sleigh's skis, and I could see red snow, yellow snow, and even black snow as we breezed past the mall. No one was visible on the streets as we pushed further north. The lights were a cold yellow as we pushed past them, and when we left the streets of Swamp City, we made it to Star Swamp proper. The swamp was silent, no frogs, no birds, no calls, not even the splash of water, as the sleigh pulled us over the snow and frozen water. Somehow, the Winterman was able to find every single way through without having to turn or even slow down, as we went even faster as the trees became a blur of green, brown, and blue. We pushed through the winter storm, and the world became foggy as the air finally felt cold. We made it to the Northern Vortex, the permanent storm to the far north, rivaled only by the Southern Vortex on the other side of the planet. Both storms were so dangerous that few had ever survived either vortex at sea, and none had ever survived the journey on land. as together, both storms kept a third of the planet hidden from human exploration. I felt a chill roll up my spine as I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm. The Winterman was focused on his journey the entire time as he kept pushing forward through the freezing fog that only grew thicker and thicker. Soon I couldn't see the reindeer in front of me, and then I couldn't see the sleigh itself. All I could see was the gray and the dim glow of the lanterns as I heard the rattle of chains and the hoofbeats of reindeer. I don't know how long this continued, but it felt like it was years until suddenly the fog was gone. I could see for kilometers, and I could see a vast tundra of ice and snow. The sky above was full of stars, far more than I had ever seen before in my life. The moon was full and bright. Luna's light was unfiltered by city smog and untouched by corruption. And finally, there was the northern lights themselves. Green waves in the sky which twisted, bounced, and danced across the sky in an eternal show unseen by human eyes. We were beyond the Northern Vortex, and we had actually made it to the tundra beyond. There were a few places in the northern forest that the northern lights could be seen, but it was so rare and so very dangerous. Anyone who had tried to make it this far north before had never returned. The only reason we knew that there was ice and tundra this far north was because of pictures taken from space. And now here I was at one of the most remote places on the planet, a place so far that no one had ever made it here before. A place so remote that it was said only Dragon walked these frozen wastes, and it was one of the most beautiful places I had ever seen. The ice sparkled like diamonds, and the stars twinkled like never-ending Christmas ornaments, and even the northern lights added to the awe as I looked above, seeing dragons, waves, and swirls in the lights above. Not sure if it was my mind projecting a pattern onto the lights, or if they indeed form these shapes just for me. "We're almost there," Winterman said for the first time on our trip. I was so caught up in the awe of the Northern Vortex that I forgot that I was here to see the Winterman's workshop. I locked my eyes forward to see if I could spot the workshop before we got there. What I saw before anything else was the smoke, long before I saw any of the buildings or the lights. At first, it was like a smudge on the horizon. I thought it was a stray cloud or even a wisp of fog, but as we got closer, I could see it was a large black cloud of smoke. As we got even closer, I could see the smokestacks producing that smoke. Clearly, their filters had not been changed in a very long time. The smokestacks were once white, but they were covered in black soot and pollution. I remembered learning from class that when you burn something like coal with too little oxygen, it causes the smoke to burn black with small coal particles, and it could greatly increase pollution. So most factories had air scrubbers, filters, and other means to make it cleaner, but it didn't stop all of the polluted air. These factories clearly didn't even care about lip service of air quality with how black the smoke was burning. And the factories themselves were massive gray brutalist buildings with no windows and only a few dim lights on the outside, made up of cylinders built on top of cylinders, where different factories connected to other factories via sky bridges built of soot-coated concrete. This was not what I imagined the Winterman's workshop would look like. I imagined a small cottage made out of gingerbread or maybe ice, where he would have one room for sleeping and one room for working, where he built all of the toys for everyone. Although, I guess, many factories made sense, toy companies had to build massive infrastructure just to build a lot of one toy, and he had to produce unique toys for every child on the planet. He drove his sleigh between factories and underneath the sky bridges, and I could only watch in horror as I saw that the snow and ice was coated in so much soot and coal that it was as black as asphalt, and the sky was permanently grayed out with no moon, no stars, no sun, and no lights. The very beautiful jewels that made the Northern Vortex such a beautiful place were blocked out by the smoke of the Winterman's industry. And it was only the beginning. In the center of all of the factories, like the hub of a giant wheel, I could see the Winterman's home. This was beautiful, but beautiful in the way that blood was beautiful around Feralia. The palace in the center gleamed pure white among the black snow and soot falling from the sky, untouched by the impurities of the world. The clouds above parted above the palace, allowing moonlight to gleam and fall upon the palace, showing me in all of its glory what the Winterman's home truly was. There was a few old stories, very old stories, from Gothia Civitas that said that the Winterman's home wasn't made of gingerbread, but it was made from the bones of those who disobeyed him, and it was held in place by the near unbreakable ice of the north. And it turned out those stories were true, but they did not give justice to the Palace of Bone. The palace was tall, the central dome stood taller than the Morado Palace in Imperial City. Not just a little, but the Morado Palace could have been one of the smaller domes butting outside the Palace of Bone, and it would have been lost. 6 smaller domes sprouted off the central dome, and all 7 of the domes had massive white towers made from billions of interlocking bones. The towers were so high that they towered further up than I could see, and far above the smoke clouds above. "What is this place?" I asked the Winterman, who chuckled. "Ho, ho, home," he said as the sleigh was pulled into the front entrance, and I could see that the inside was just as haunting as the outside. Every bone sealed together like pieces of a puzzle, ice holding them all together, and every few meters I could see the top half of a skull. Skulls that had dim lights inside of their sockets, like eyes made from candle flames, that followed us as we made it to the center of the Palace of Bone. Despite its massive size, we made it there in mere moments. There I saw the Winterman's personal workshop. The Palace of Bone, while unexpected, was at least something that I was familiar with. The Winterman's true workshop was something that I couldn't dream up in my worst nightmares. There were endless hooks and chains hanging from the ceiling. From those hooks hung dolls, tin parts, bone, flesh, and even whole human bodies. Bodies that no longer bled, but still struggled. On his tables were many projects in varying degrees of completion. I saw autopsy tables where every organ was removed, and the skin was clipped open, and yet the body still moved. The head gasping, unable to scream without lungs, but still it tried to scream from the pain it was in. I saw creations of tin, flesh, and wood, all merged into one. Wooden soldiers with human eyes whose breath fogged the air, and like my own breath. I saw tin dolls with hair of shredded skin, and whose joints were made from bone. I saw infant skeletons coated in resin and plastic, where the first stages were barely coated in the material, while those at the far end were lifelike baby dolls. Dolls with human skeletons inside of them. In the Winterman's workshop, he would replace every part of a person to build something monstrous, and he would take those removed parts to add them to a different monster. Not all of his creations were toys nor toy-like. I saw a hunched back being that expanded and contracted like it was breathing, but it had no head, and only a single panic-filled eye on its chest as it moved scraps from one table to another. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I could not move my mouth, let alone my body, as the Winterman chuckled, his laugh no longer reassuring to me, as he left the sleigh, and I joined him. You are no longer your own. You are mine. You gave me your name, and I took your bones, replacing them with ice from the Northern Vortex. Ice that I control. You can only obey me, and if you try to disobey. There was silence for a moment before I felt the worst pain in my life so far. Every bone in my body sharpened and froze. Breathing hurt, thinking hurt worse, and all I could do was stand there, unable to move, just taking the pain. My head glanced down to my left hand as I saw ice growing out of my hand. Ice grew out of my fingertips before growing sharper and longer as icicles broke the skin around every joint, as ice grew out of the blood, freezing, so I couldn't even bleed. I couldn't even scream as the ice stopped growing, and the pain eased some, but it did not retreat and it did not melt. That is your first lesson. You will endure, you will serve. I need a new assistant. Now grab me a bone saw. I need help opening a chest cavity, he said as I stalked away, fresh pain blossoming with every step as I walked towards his tool table. And I had my first long night with the Winterman. The frozen bones sticking out of my skin never thawed and never melted. I had to break them off, and they hurt every bit as breaking your own bones, but no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't scream. I learned over time that while I could not disobey the Winterman, I could still make my own choices, as long as they didn't disobey him, hurt him, nor his work. I think it was a conditioning of his, getting us to learn to obey him willingly, so he didn't expend so much energy forcing us to work for him. And I do mean us. I was not his only assistant, and I was not his only worker. It was rare to see someone working from the factory, but they were bruised, tired, and always coughing up a storm. Always suffering, but never dying. Oh no. Death was a rare luxury only gifted by the Winterman himself. Instead, he would trap a soul to flesh, bone, or an object, and every one of us would serve a purpose. Some of us built for him, others served him, and others left the Northern Vortex to do his work in the world beyond. Those who left the Northern Vortex had no mind left, and didn't even try to live anymore, having been broken a long time ago. And as harsh as life was in the Northern Vortex, I learned that it was a lot worse than I initially thought. The nights in the Palace of Bone were long. Sometimes he would focus on a task for so long that it felt like weeks had passed before the Winterman finally rested, giving us our rest too, although it wasn't rest as in sleep. That luxury was even scarcer than death in this frozen hell. We would just stop moving, toys put away on the shelf until he had purpose for us again. Sometimes he would play with us for months, taking us apart over and over, having us build things, break things, and do things for him, not allowing us any rest, and still, that was better than having him get bored of us. Sometimes he would put us away for weeks at a time, unable to move, as the ice gradually overtook our bodies from the low temperatures of the Northern Vortex. So, when we did move, we had to break out of the ice. If the ice overtook too much of us, he wouldn't bother breaking us out of the ice. He could always get more toys elsewhere, and those trapped in the ice would be there forever, never sleeping, never dreaming, never dying, always feeling the agony of the ice, watching the world around you change, while you stay the same, praying and hoping that something that crawls by will take enough pity on you to make eye contact with you. And if you're free, you try to avoid making eye contact with those that are frozen. If you don't, then it reminds you of your own inevitable pain, and that was not our worst torture. If he stayed good, he stayed free of the ice, but some misery was shared by all. Plants don't grow this far north. He doesn't seek food from beyond the vortex, and the only meat in the Palace of Bone was from those that were living in it. I tried to resist eating them. They still lived, they still moved, but the hunger only grew worse. I couldn't starve to death, but I could grow weaker from hunger. I would fail his requests more and more, as my body wasn't strong enough to move tools around. But when I failed, he made my bones of ice grow and overtake my flesh. At one point, over half of my body was coated in ice that ached, stung, and burned, even as it chipped and tapped off other items. I tried eating ice, but it only made my hunger worse, and in time, I had to eat flesh from the Winterman's workshop. The first time I ate human flesh was the half-rotten offal that the Winterman had dumped from a corpse that was hung from its hands by hooks of iron. Even with the organs removed, the eye still fluttered, but it stopped trying to scream a long time ago. I could smell decay and suffering on the offal, but I was too hungry to care as I crawled on the ground, the ice around my mouth having to be ripped away to allow me to eat. The pain of my skin being pulled away, along with the ice, was almost as bad as the feeling of ripping the ice from my body. I crawled on the ground, grabbing at the offal with my greedy, dirty hands, as I shoved the meat into my dry, cold mouth, forcing swallow after painful swallow of the meat, as the pain of hunger began to fade, and I realized the Winterman was watching me. And he was laughing at my humiliation and pain as I ate the rotten flesh. The next time I ate flesh, it was fresher, and the time after, it was even fresher. Eventually, I stopped caring where the flesh came from, oftentimes simply biting the flesh off of the Winterman's subjects, with the flesh still warm and living. I didn't care at that point. I was hungry, and I had learned that any sense of morality in me died with my past before the ice. I don't know how long I lived as the Winterman's assistant. My mind no longer cared before I heard whispers for some of the newcomers. They told of a way to send a message by letter to anyone in the world by requesting that Vanth carry the letter to them, that it had a torch stamp on it. So I took a rare pen and paper and wrote this story on it, hoping that Vanth would deliver it to my mother. If you get this message, please know that the Winterman is a necromancer, and that he has taken me. I don't know how much of myself is left to give before I lose every trace of my humanity. I know that my body has changed. The growth of ice has caused my flesh to warp around it. Experiments done on me by the Winterman has changed me even further, and that is before all of the times my flesh was taken to feed someone else or myself. And that is just my physical body. My mind, I fear, will be too far gone soon. There's years I go without a single thought other than pain and obedience. I don't know how long I've been here, but I've forgotten what the sun looks like. I know that time can break anyone, and time has already broken me. I am just hoping there's enough of me to send my love to my mother. I wish I could sign this letter with my name, however, I don't remember it. I haven't remembered it since I gave it to the Winterman. Just know that this letter is sent with love by your only son. Love, your son. Samantha William returned from her double shift at the hospital, expecting to find her son asleep on the couch. She had special gifts supposedly given by the Winterman, but when she made it home, she couldn't find her son. All she found was a trail of footsteps leading from her locked house that stopped on the street. She called the police and even the Vigiles Urbani. They found no trace of her son that day until the afternoon, when an officer had the idea to open the gifts under the tree that Samantha did not remember wrapping. The wrapped envelope labeled "Mom" contained the letter above, supposedly written by her son. However, the police do not believe that it was accurate at all, because of what was found in the box underneath the tree. It was the complete skeleton of Samantha's son. Blood stains still on the bones, but otherwise no tissue on the bones. Dental records matched young Jack Williams, and the DNA was a partial match for Samantha, proving it was her son. The killer was never found, but other reports around the world of the supposed good saint killer have been reported, but nothing conclusively has been proven. Samantha still believes that her son is out there somewhere and has spent the last 50 years trying to find someone who can bring her son back. When she heard of my project, she reached out to me personally, and I thank her immensely for her help. And for the first time in 50 years, she has hope that her son may be back home for Christmas.